Okay, so we're learning about business today, the business side of hospitality. And, the biggest part of that is money. You need revenue, you need profit, you need to pay your bills. That's kind of the foundation of a business. So, here to help us kind of learn about what all that means is Joseph. And Joseph, I always butcher the name of your restaurant. So I'm going to let you say it, but you have two restaurants in LA that are quite iconic. So let's start with what are your restaurants and what do you do?
Sure. I have restaurants called Wurstküche. It means sausage kitchen in German. And we're big exotic sausage grills and German and Belgian beer halls. Um, and they're live, boisterous places. They're really fun to come for all ages. I started them 15 years ago, and they've been, you know, gratefully, they've been really successful. And I started with my cousin, and we've been able to manage both our finances and our family dynamic and our relationship to make them really successful and run what I think is a quite good business.
Good.
Uh,
Can I jump in here because you said exotic sausages, and I think that that's a really fun part of your concept. Can you, before we dive into finance, what are some of your menu items that are more unique?
we sell exotic sausages like rattlesnake and rabbit, duck and bacon, pheasant.
Oh no, you froze. Oh, there you
Oh
came.
no.
Yeah, your exotic sausages, your fries, you're quite popular, and like I said, iconic. So thanks for joining us. So now the money piece. What is involved in the financing of a restaurant and the operating of a small business?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the financial side of running a restaurant is a huge component of it. I think a lot of people get into the restaurant industry with a lack of knowledge for that side. And unfortunately, that's probably why a lot of businesses and restaurants go out of business, because we're really good at the technical side of making a great meal, being very nice to guests, creating a great experience. But if we're not financially sound and stable, then it doesn't matter how great you are at those things. You can be as popular as and sold out every single night. But if you're not managing those finances, it's why a lot of restaurants just don't survive and have to go out of business. So I think it is really important to make sure that you have a healthy business, and I think that's largely driven by your financials. It's really easy to make a lot of money in the restaurant industry very quickly and lose a lot very quickly. And so if you're not watching those financials pretty closely, then yeah, things can turn very quickly on you.
Can you talk
Uh,
about food costs? Because I know that that's where a lot of restaurants sink themselves because they say, oh, that sandwich it flies off the shelf. It's a top selling sandwich. But then when you break down the cost, maybe you're only making like 30 cents or something because your ingredients are so expensive or your labor. So can you talk about the importance of food costs or some best practices around that?
sure. Well, watching the food cost, which is essentially how much are you putting into each product that you're selling. Um, and a lot of times it's not necessarily what you're putting into the meal, right? It's what's going bad or what's getting eaten by your staff or you're giving away. That all contributes to the food cost. And we look at food cost as a percentage of what we, sell it for. And so and what we sell it for minus what it costs to make all those ingredients over a month period of time is kind of derivative of what our food cost is. And that would be our margin. And if that's small, that's not good. We want a healthy margin in there. We need to make money on each thing that we sell. So food cost, is pretty much the biggest component or most controllable component because you're able to set your menu price and you're able to determine how much of an ingredient you're putting in there, whether it's salmon or steak or tofu. I mean, each one of them has its own individual food cost, and then your portion control kind of derives how much you're going to make out of that.
Great. And I know maybe you could talk about food costs. I know is a big chunk of change in a restaurant. And can you talk about some of the other major expense categories in a restaurant?
Yeah. Restaurants are surprising because they have so many unexpected and hidden costs. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning, but just getting the restaurant open is a huge undertaking where you have to get that money from friends, family, banks, wherever you're going to get it from. And that's one of the costs that you're going to probably be paying out throughout the first 2 or 3 years, is paying back the money that it took you to open the restaurant. And then you have rent, which a big portion of the restaurant's expenses, labor, which and that's a big controllable cost. You know, depending on your service style, you have more or less people. Then there's just really weird fees and taxes that you would never expect. Like, how many times does your toilet get flushed?
Oh,
Because
that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the city calculates, you know, one, how much water you're using, but two, when they figure you're using water, well, not everybody's drinking it. It's going into the sewers. So there's a sewer charge. There's usually a charge for how many, you know, each individual seat that you have. There's all sorts of insurances and licenses and permits that, depending on your operations, can be really, really significant. So, you know, we start out with a budget in the beginning of the year and try to imagine all of those costs. And it's easier if you've done business before, because a lot of those things will reoccur, or you can determine what's reoccurring or just a one-time cost. But there's certainly a lot of unexpected costs that pop up, and you want
I
to
hear that all the
buffer.
time. Yeah. Because you don't know that this permit is going to be $15,000 and take you 2 months, which is going to delay your opening, or this permit, or yeah, even like you said, a cost of, you know, paper towels and things like that you really have to bake into your menu prices because somebody has to pay that.
Correct. Yeah. And so, you know, a $15 sandwich with maybe $3 or $4 worth of ingredient cost, you look at that and you say, oh, wow, that person's making $11 or $12. But then you got to take out the chunk for rent, and then you got to take out the chunk for permits and electricity and gas and all sorts of these expenses. And that ultimately kind of derives your profit and loss statement. That's the way that we look at it. And that's one of the major sort of financial reporting elements that we look at to determine whether or not we're making money or losing money.
Yeah,
Right?
your students, you will hear this, you know, in your business journeys quite a bit. It's short terms called P&L, so profit and loss, and that is kind of your gold standard for seeing how much money you're making and how much money you're spending, right, Joseph?
Yeah.
Did I get it?
And in a really, you know, just big picture way, you're just taking how much money did I make up here at the top, and I subtract how much money I paid out for vendors, for payroll, for rent, and it's you get detailed in there, and then the end, it's what's the money that's left over, and that's kind of how much you have. But you have to really determine, is that really the money that you have left over? Or do you have to pay other investors, or do you have to pay the bank, or what are these things? So you try to, that bottom line is, you'll hear it referred to as the bottom line. How much money did I really make?
Yeah, and I think one last question I want to talk to you about, and you alluded to this earlier, which is how do you want to start your own restaurant? How do you pay for it? How do you get it off the ground? How do you open the doors? Most people by themselves will not have the capital or the money, the millions or hundreds of thousands that it takes to open a restaurant. So there are two routes you can go. And so can you talk about angel investors and what those are, and the perks and cons of that, and then you know, bank financing?
Yeah. So, you know, when you're raising money, um, there's the old adage that you go to the 3 F's: the friends, families, and fools. That are, you know, your friends and your family may give you some money, and then foolish people will give you money in those early stages. Because it's a big risk to invest in a restaurant or any business in that matter. There's a lot of risk involved in that. And so when you take on investors, there's sort of two different ways that you can get money, right? There's equity, which means that you're giving part of your company away, you're selling part of the company, or there's debt. And that means that you have a promissory note or some sort of promise to pay somebody back. And usually there's interest, or almost always there's interest attached to that money. So let's say I borrow $100,000. It's like buying a house. I'm paying an interest rate to be able to borrow that money. The good thing about with things, so getting the money through banks, which would be the debt, or taking a loan out, is that once you pay it off, the company's all yours and you're in control. When you do the equity financing, you are selling a little bit of the control of the company away. And it becomes, particularly complicated in later stages, especially if you're making money, because other people may have other opinions, but don't necessarily work in the restaurant. So that's something to be careful with. But I would, if anybody's thinking about working in a restaurant or starting a restaurant, I would really encourage you to work in a restaurant for a good time and make sure that you cycle through all those positions and you learn all the things, because at the end of the day, you're going to be taking somebody else's money and gambling on it, whether or not you have the education and knowledge to execute it. So the more that you know about what twists and turns can come along the way, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, like a kind of like a free boot camp, or one that you're getting paid for. So you learn systems, you learn the pitfalls, you learn all the things that you need to do. And then when you feel like you have the tools, that's when you can start your own dream, your own business.
Absolutely. You shouldn't ever go to a job and just click in and then clock in and clock out. If you're not learning at that job and you're not asking your managers and the owners questions, well, you're probably missing an opportunity if you have that entrepreneurial spirit in you. I from the owners that I know, they're always interested in sharing what they know for people that are really interested.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Joseph. This was an education for me as well. Finance is not my strong suit, but like we said at the beginning, it's what makes the business successful or not. You can have the best burger in the world, but if you're not making money off of it, your restaurant's not going to stay open.
It's not necessarily the most glamorous or the fun part of the business, but it is a really important part. And so you're right.
Yeah. Good luck to everyone as they start the
business to stay in
business.
business. Otherwise, it's a charity and you can't do that for too long.
Yeah. You'll run out pretty quickly. All right. Well, thank you, Joseph. And to all the students, maybe go try some rattlesnake sausage if you're ever in LA.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Aaron.